I spent countless hours as a volunteer at Waverly Hills Sanatorium, a sprawling, eerie former tuberculosis hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, known for its grim history and paranormal reputation among Americans. I've joined numerous tours and overnight investigations, plunging into the building's shadowy corridors and decaying rooms. Let me start by saying this. It doesn't matter who you are, skeptic, believer, or somewhere in between, things happen in that place that defy explanation. I've witnessed events that shake you to your core, moments that linger in your mind long after you've left the sanatorium's crumbling walls. Over the years, I've seen people become possessed, their eyes rolling back as their voices turned guttural, speaking words that weren't their own. I felt something cold and forceful try to seize control of my own body, a sensation like invisible hands gripping my mind, urging me to surrender. I've heard disembodied voices whispering in empty hallways, their words indistinct but heavy with intent. I've caught the unmistakable scent of cigar smoke curling through the air, only to find no one smoking, no source for the pungent aroma. I've been shoved against a wall by an unseen force, the impact sudden and jarring. I've seen a doppelganger, a chilling, identical copy of a living person, staring back from a darkened corner. I've watched inanimate objects, like chairs and doors, move on their own, creaking and scraping as if guided by invisible hands. You name it, it's happened there. The sanatorium is a crucible of the unexplainable, a place where the veil between worlds feels paper-thin. But the most striking experience, the one that seared into my memory, happened during an overnight investigation about 5 years ago, when I was 21. I was a college student then, living in southern Ohio, about 45 minutes from Cincinnati, attending a small college with a niche major that kept me isolated from friends and family during the week. My friends were scattered across the Midwest at their own universities, and my family stayed back in my hometown. My girlfriend thankfully attended a college nearby, so I'd make frequent trips to see her, but weekends were often reserved for road trips to visit friends at their larger, livelier campuses. On this particular night, I was part of an investigation at Waverly Hills with 2 small groups exploring the massive 5-story building. The sanatorium, with its long echoing hallways and abandoned patient rooms, feels like a labyrinth even in daylight, but at night, it's a world of shadows and whispers. My group included my cousin and his wife, who were stationed on the 4th floor, along with a few members from the other group. My partner for the investigation, a woman I'll call Sarah, was a staunch skeptic. She dismissed anything paranormal as nonsense, rolling her eyes at every creak or cold spot, insisting there was always a logical explanation. Her disbelief was almost a challenge to the building itself, as if she dared it to prove her wrong. I had been exploring another part of the sanatorium, checking the restrooms on our assigned floor, when I decided to head up to the 4th floor to regroup with my cousin, his wife Sarah, and the others. The 4th floor is infamous among investigators for its shadow people, dark, humanoid figures said to roam the halls, especially near the old patient rooms where so many suffered and died during the hospital's peak in the early 20th century. As I climbed the stairs, the air grew heavier, the silence broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint and rusted gurneys left behind decades ago. When I reached the 4th floor, I expected to find the group waiting, maybe joking or comparing notes. But the hallway was empty. No cousin, no wife, no Sarah, no strangers from the other group. Just silence, thick and oppressive. I called out softly, my voice swallowed by the vastness of the building. No response. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine, but I figured they'd wandered off to investigate a noise or check another room. I headed back downstairs, my footsteps echoing, intending to search the lower floors. I found them on the 2nd floor, huddled together in a small, windowless room that once served as a nurse's station. They were visibly shaken, pale, white, and clinging to each other. Even Sarah, the unshakable skeptic, was trembling, her face streaked with tears. My cousin's wife was gripping his arm, so tightly her knuckles were white. The strangers from the other group, people we'd only met that night, looked just as rattled, their flashlights shaking in their hands. I asked what happened, my heart pounding as I took in their fear. They all spoke at once, their words tumbling over each other, but the story they told was eerily consistent. After I'd left the 4th floor to check the restrooms, they'd stayed in the hallway, scanning the darkness with their flashlights, listening for anything unusual. Suddenly, at the same moment, every single one of them saw it, a massive pitch-black shadow, taller and broader than any human, gliding toward them down the hallway. It wasn't just a trick of the light or a vague shape. It had weight, presence, and purpose, its edges sharp against the dim glow of their lights. At the same time, a smaller shadow, low to the ground, came scuttling across the floor, moving with unnatural speed, like a spider or a crawling child. The two shapes moved in tandem, closing in on the group. The sight was so terrifying, so utterly alien, that they bolted, scrambling down the stairs in a blind panic, not stopping until they reached the second floor. My cousin said it felt like the shadows were chasing them, their presence lingering at the edge of their vision. Sarah, who'd always scoffed at ghost stories, was the most shaken of all. She kept muttering that it couldn't be real, but her tears betrayed her. The strangers swore they'd never return to the fourth floor, their voices cracking as they recounted the same details: the towering shadow, the crawling figure, the overwhelming sense of dread. What struck me most was the unanimity of their accounts. These people, my cousin, his wife Sarah, and complete strangers, had no reason to concoct a shared lie. They'd seen the same thing, felt the same terror, at the exact same time. For Sarah, the experience shattered her skepticism. She refused to go back to the fourth floor that night, staying close to the group, her usual bravado gone. The rest of the investigation was subdued. The group, too, rattled to venture far from the safer, more familiar areas of the building. That night at Waverly Hills is burned into my mind, vivid even 5 years later. I was a 26-year-old man when I shared this story, but at 21, standing in that haunted sanatorium, I felt the raw power of the unexplainable. The shadows on the fourth floor weren't just a story. They were a force, a reminder that some places hold secrets we can't rationalize. Waverly Hills is one of those places, and that night, it showed us all something we'll never forget. I was 21, a college student living in southern Ohio, about 45 minutes from Cincinnati, attending a small college with a specialized major that kept me isolated from most of my friends and family during the week. My friends were scattered across the Midwest at their own universities, and my family stayed back in my hometown. My girlfriend thankfully went to a college nearby, so I'd make 2 or 3 trips a week to see her, often studying together. On weekends, I'd hit the road to visit friends at their bigger, more exciting campuses. This particular weekend, I was gearing up for a 2-hour drive to see my buddy Kyle at his school, a place I won't name for privacy. I'd made the trip maybe 30 times before, so I knew the route like the back of my hand. No GPS needed. It was a Friday afternoon, and I just finished classes for the day. I set off around 5:50 p.m., aiming to reach Kyle's dorm by 8 p.m., right on time for a night of college fun. Think binge drinking and scarfing down greasy food, the kind of stuff you live for at that age. About 15 minutes into my drive, my phone rang. It was my girlfriend, which was odd since I'd already told her I was headed to Kyle's. Worried something was wrong, I answered quickly. She explained that her car had broken down in her dorm parking lot as she was leaving for work. Since I wasn't too far into my trip, she asked if I could swing by and give her a quick ride to her job. Being the dutiful boyfriend, I agreed, even though it meant backtracking. I was about 20 minutes from her campus, so I pulled over on the highway to check my phone for a faster route. The GPS showed an exit coming up that led to a side street, cutting my time to her campus. I texted her that I was on my way and took the exit. I passed this exit plenty of times but never had a reason to take it, so the surroundings were completely unfamiliar. The road wound through dense woods on the right, with a highway running parallel on the left. About half a mile in, the road curved, and trees closed in on both sides. It was October, and the woods were a stunning mix of warm colors, reds, oranges, and yellows, making the detour almost enjoyable. The area was quiet, with thick forest broken only by the occasional driveway and mailbox. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of nice houses, set back far enough to feel private. It was getting dark, and I had about a mile to go before my next turn. Then I noticed a Toyota parked on the side of the road. Its hood popped open. As I got closer, I saw a man in a shirt and tie, his head buried under the hood, clearly dealing with a broken-down car. There was no traffic behind me, so I slowed down and rolled down my window to ask if he was okay or needed to borrow my phone. He didn't seem to hear me at first, so I raised my voice and called out, "Hey man, is everything okay?" This time he lifted his head from the engine and looked at me. He seemed like an ordinary guy. Short brown hair, brown eyes, a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, just a regular, unremarkable face you'd pass on the street. He smiled and explained he was on his way home from work when something went wrong with his engine. I offered my phone again, suggesting he could call for a tow or a ride. He brushed it off, saying he had a car service that would pick up his car, but they were closed until the next morning. Then he hesitated and asked, "I hate to ask, but could you possibly give me a ride to my brother's house? It's only 4 minutes from here." Looking back, that should have been a red flag. Why didn't he call his brother with my phone? But in the moment, I wasn't thinking straight. The guy seemed so normal, clean-cut, driving a nice car, not like the stereotypical hitchhiker you'd see in a horror movie. I was also bigger than him, so I figured I could handle myself if things went south. Plus, his brother's place was supposedly on the way to my girlfriend's campus, so I agreed to give him a quick lift. I'd later regret this decision, and my girlfriend would give me an earful for taking so long to get to her, but that's another story. I unlocked the passenger door, and he climbed in, pointing me toward his brother's house. For the first few minutes, things felt normal. I had music playing, some rap, probably 50 Cent or something similar, and we made small talk. But then I noticed something off. Every time a swear word came up in the lyrics, he flinched, like the words physically bothered him. It was subtle at first, but it happened consistently with every curse. I picked up on it and switched to a different song, one without any swearing, thinking maybe he was just sensitive to it. About a minute later, though, he reached up and slammed his hand on the radio's power button, shutting it off completely. It wasn't a violent slam, but it was forceful enough to make me jump. Trying to keep things light, I said, "Not your style, huh?" He didn't respond, just stared straight ahead, his face blank. That silence unnerved me. I was ready for this guy to get out of my car. Trying to move things along, I asked, "So, how much further?" "I got somewhere to be soon, and I can't be late." He replied, "About 4 minutes," in a flat tone. My stomach dropped. He'd said the same thing when he got in, and that was at least 8 minutes ago. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. Either he was lying about the distance or something else was off. I decided I'd had enough. I didn't think he was dangerous, but I wasn't about to keep driving with this weird vibe, especially with my girlfriend waiting and probably already annoyed. I pulled over and told him, "This is as far as I can take you. You'll have to walk the rest of the way." His demeanor shifted instantly. Instead of getting angry like I expected, he turned panicky, practically begging me to keep going. "Please, just a little further," he said, his voice trembling. His overreaction set off every instinct I had. I doubled down, my tone firm. "You need to get out of my car now, or I'll make you get out." That's when he pulled out a bulky wallet and offered to pay me to keep driving. He fumbled with it, pulling out a stack of $20 bills, but as he did, something else slipped out and landed on the seat next to him. It happened so fast, I saw it clear as day, a small Ziploc bag filled with human teeth, front teeth, molars, the works. He snatched it up in a split second and shoved it back into his pocket, but the image was burned into my mind. My heart stopped. I freaked out worse than I ever have and screamed, "Get the hell out of my car." He looked shocked, his eyes wide, but he scrambled out without a word, standing on the side of the road as I peeled away. I was shaking, my mind racing with what I'd just seen. Those weren't his teeth. He had a full set in his mouth. Whose were they? Why did he have them? I called the police as soon as I was a safe distance away, my voice probably incoherent as I tried to explain. They told me not to pick up hitchhikers again and said there was nothing they could do since no crime had been committed. I don't know where that guy was going or what he was doing, and honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that bag of teeth haunted me then and still does now. It was the creepiest damn thing I've ever experienced, and I've never taken that exit again. This happened last night to my mother, and it's left our whole family on edge. She was in my brother's room, tucking him into bed. He's 10 years old, and his room is on the second floor of our house in a quiet subdivision in southern Ohio, not far from Cincinnati. For context, a subdivision in the U.S. is a planned residential neighborhood, often with similar-looking homes and a safe, suburban feel, not the kind of place you'd expect anything creepy to happen. My brother's room has a window directly across from his bed, so when he's lying down, he can see straight through it to the porch outside. My mom was lying on her stomach next to him, facing the bed, chatting softly to help him settle down for the night. From her position, she couldn't see the window, but my brother, lying on his back, had a clear view. All of a sudden, a light flickered on the porch, casting a glow through the window. My mom assumed it was me or my twin sister out there, maybe coming home late or stepping outside for some reason. But both of us were downstairs in the basement, nowhere near the porch. My brother, staring at the window, said, "That's weird." His tone was enough to make my mom pause. She rolled over to look at the window, and that's when she saw it. A shadow pressed against the glass, not just a vague shape, but the distinct outline of a human figure. We have plants on the porch, some potted ferns and flowers, but she said it didn't look like any of them. The shadow was too tall, too defined, with shoulders and a head that moved slightly, as if someone was standing just outside. Her heart racing, my mom got up, left my brother's room, and came downstairs to ask if either of us had been outside. When she found us in the basement, playing video games and completely unaware of anything upstairs, her face went pale. She went to the front door to turn off the porch light, thinking maybe it was casting odd shadows. But when she checked, the porch light wasn't even on. That sent a chill through her. She unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch to investigate, walking over to my brother's window to see if anything could explain the shadow. A branch, a reflection, anything. There was nothing. No plants out of place, no animals, no sign of anyone having been there. She turned on the porch light for good measure and went back to my brother's room to check again. The shadow was gone, the window now showing only the empty porch under the glow of the light. What makes this even creepier is the context of our home. We live in a subdivision, not some isolated cabin in the woods. Our house is set back from the street with a long driveway, so our porch is a good distance from the road. For someone to be standing there at midnight, they'd have to deliberately walk up our driveway and onto our porch for no apparent reason. That alone is unsettling. But there's more. Later that night, we all heard strange noises outside, rustling like footsteps in the gravel, and a faint tapping that stopped as soon as we tried to listen closely. None of us dared to go outside after my mom told us what happened. We locked every door and window and stayed alert, half expecting something too else to happen. What's got me even more spooked is something that happened to me a few nights earlier. I jog around our neighborhood regularly, sticking to the well-lit streets of our subdivision. The other night, I noticed a car following me for about 2 blocks. It moved slowly, keeping pace with me, its headlights casting my shadow ahead. I sped up, and it eventually turned away, but it left me rattled. I don't know if it's related to what my mom and brother saw, but the timing feels too coincidental to ignore. The whole thing has left us shaken, wondering who or what was on our porch that night and why. It's not like we live in the middle of nowhere, but something about that shadow and those noises feels deeply wrong. This happened when I was a 10-year-old girl growing up in southern Ohio, not far from Cincinnati, in a quiet suburban neighborhood much like the subdivisions familiar to many Americans, rows of family homes, green lawns, and a sense of safety. I had a golden retriever husky mix named Coda, who was just 6 months old at the time. He was my best friend, a fluffy bundle of energy with bright eyes and a playful spirit. I adored him. Every day after school, I'd race home, my backpack bouncing, just so I could play with him before tackling my homework. We'd wrestle in the backyard, toss a ball, or just lie in the grass while I told him about my day. Coda was my confidant, and like most kids, I'd pour my heart out to him, talking about my friends, my crushes, or whatever drama was brewing in my 4th grade world. One afternoon, my mom was driving me to my badminton class, a weekly activity at the local community center where I'd swing a racket with other kids my age, trying to keep the shuttlecock in the air. We were running a bit late, and as we drove, Mom suddenly remembered she'd forgotten to pick up an important package from her boss at the post office. She said it'd be a quick stop, so we pulled into the parking lot of our small-town post office, a familiar spot with a few parking spaces out front. She found an empty spot parked and told me to stay in the car with Koda while she ran inside. "I'll be right back," she promised, cracking the back window just enough to keep the air circulating so we wouldn't overheat. The gap was small, maybe wide enough for someone to slip an arm through if they tried hard, but it felt safe enough. Mom dashed off, leaving me and Koda in the back seat of our minivan. I settled in, petting Koda's soft fur as he sprawled across my lap, his tail wagging lazily. I started chatting with him, as I often did, rambling about my friends, school, and whatever else popped into my head. To a 10-year-old, talking to your dog like they're your therapist is perfectly normal. Koda tilted his head, his big brown eyes fixed on me like he understood every word. The parking lot was quiet, just a few cars parked nearby, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. Then I noticed someone approaching the car, a man, his figure obscured by a dirty, tattered hoodie. He looked rough, like someone who'd been living on the streets, with unkempt hair spilling out from under the hood and grime smudged on his hands. In our small town, seeing someone who appeared homeless wasn't common, and it made me uneasy. He stopped by the driver's side window and knocked, the sound sharp against the quiet. "Hey, kid, is your mom around?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. My stomach twisted. Koda's ears perked up, and he shifted in my lap, his body tensing. I tried to stay calm, remembering what my parents taught me about strangers. "Yeah," I said, my voice small but steady. "She's coming back any second." "Where is she?" he pressed, leaning closer to the window. Koda let out a low growl, a sound I'd never heard from him before. He was usually so gentle, always eager to lick anyone who came near. His reaction made my heart race. "She'll be here soon," I said, trying to sound confident. "Probably any moment now." There was a tense pause, his eyes locked on me through the window. Then, without warning, he shoved his arm through the cracked window, a knife glinting in his hand. I screamed, scrambling to the other side of the back seat, my back slamming against the door. Koda exploded into action, lunging at the window with a snarl, his teeth sinking into the man's arm like it was a piece of meat. The man yelled, jerking back, but the knife slipped from his grip as his hand hit the top of the window frame, clattering onto the seat. Blood seeped through a tear in his jacket, dark and spreading fast. He yanked his arm back through the window, cursing loudly, his face twisted in pain. I was shaking, tears streaming down my face, but I grabbed the knife, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it. In that moment, I remembered a scene from The Lion King, where Simba, cornered by hyenas, tried to scare them off with a roar. It was a silly thought, but I was a kid, desperate and terrified. I'd also overheard a fifth grader at school use a swear word that felt powerful at the time. Channeling all the courage I could muster, I pointed the knife at him through the window and yelled in my loudest, fiercest voice, "Get the hell out of here." I waved the knife like I might throw it, though I had no idea how to do that. The man froze for a second, his eyes wide with surprise, then bolted, disappearing across the parking lot. I sat there, clutching the knife, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Koda was still growling, his fur bristled, but he pressed against me, protective and warm. When my mom returned a few minutes later, she saw the blood on the door and the knife in my hand. I blurted out the whole story, words tumbling over each other as I tried to explain what happened. She went pale, pulling me into a tight hug, checking me and Koda for injuries. We called the police from the car, but all I could describe was a dirty man in a hoodie who looked homeless. They searched the area, but found no one matching my description. That day is etched in my memory, the fear and adrenaline as vivid now as they were when I was 10. Koda was my hero, and I hugged him extra tight that night, grateful for his fierce loyalty. The incident left me wary of strangers for a long time, and even now, I can't help but double-check the windows when I'm in a parked car. It was a moment that showed me how quickly things can turn from normal to terrifying, and how a brave dog can make all the difference. Back in 2007, when I was about 19, I was dating a guy named Josh, and I'd spend days at a time at his house in a small town in southern Ohio, not far from Cincinnati. His place was a modest, single-story home with a finished basement, the kind of house common in American suburbs, with creaky floors and a lived-in feel. We'd mostly hang out in the basement, getting stoned and watching movies on an old couch, surrounded by the glow of a TV and the faint smell of popcorn and weed. Early in our relationship, Josh mentioned in passing that his house was haunted. I laughed it off at first, thinking he was just messing with me, but he insisted it was true, describing strange sounds and unexplained events that had been happening for years. I didn't take it seriously until I experienced it myself. The most common occurrence was what Josh called the voices. We'd be sitting in one part of the house, say the living room or the basement, and suddenly, it sounded like a television had been turned on at full volume in another room. It was always the same, a man and a woman arguing, their voices loud but muffled, like you could almost make out the words but not quite. The sound was so real you'd swear someone was there. The first time it happened, I was sprawled on the couch in the main floor living room, half watching a movie. The voices erupted from the direction of Josh's dad's bedroom, down the hall. I froze, thinking his dad must have come home early from his week-long work trip. Josh sighed like it was routine and got up to check. I trailed behind, curious but uneasy. We walked down the hall, the voices growing louder with every step, a heated back and forth that filled the air. But the moment Josh touched the door handle to his dad's room, the sound cut off like someone had flipped a switch. We opened the door to find a room empty. No TV, no radio, no open windows, nothing plugged in. Just a neatly made bed and a dresser covered in family photos. The silence was heavier than the noise had been. We shrugged it off and headed back to the living room, but as we sat down, I heard it again, faintly, the same man and woman arguing, now coming from the very room we'd just left. It was like the sound followed us, playing games with our senses. This happened a handful of times during my stays, the voices bouncing from room to room, always stopping when we got close, then starting again somewhere else. It was unnerving, like the house was toying with us. Josh said it had been going on for years, and he'd given up trying to explain it. But one night in the basement took things to a whole new level. The basement was set up like a small apartment, with a living room area where we'd watch movies, a kitchenette with a sink and cabinets, and a bathroom off to the side. We were lying on a blanket on the floor, high and half asleep, the TV droning softly with some late-night rerun. Josh's corgi Max never came down to the basement. He preferred the main floor, curling up by the front door, so it was just the two of us. As I was drifting off, a sudden, deafening crash jolted us both upright. It came from the kitchenette, like a stack of pots and pans had toppled onto the tile floor, clanging and rattling with enough force to shake the walls. My heart leaped into my throat, and I clutched Josh's arm, my eyes wide. The noise was so loud, so real, I was sure something had collapsed. Before I could process it, the crashing stopped, replaced by a skittering sound, like a pack of dogs scrambling across the floor, their claws clicking frantically. Then a door slammed, sharp and final, sounding exactly like the bathroom door on the other side of the kitchenette. I was shaking, tears prickling my eyes from how startled I was. Josh looked just as spooked, his face pale in a dim light. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just grabbed a flashlight from the coffee table. I made him check, practically pushing him toward the kitchenette door. He opened it slowly, the hinges creaking, and shone the light inside. Nothing. The kitchenette was pristine, no pots on the floor, no pans out of place, everything neatly stacked in the cabinets. We checked the bathroom next. The door was closed, just as we heard, but when we opened it, it was empty. The tiny window in there was painted shut, impossible for anything to get through. No sign of what could have caused the noise. We stood there, hearts pounding, trying to make sense of it. The air felt thick, like something was watching us. I was too freaked out to stay in the basement, so we grabbed our stuff and went upstairs for the rest of the night. Max was asleep by the front door, oblivious, confirming he hadn't been anywhere near the basement. That incident left me rattled for days, the memory of those crashes and skittering sounds replaying in my head. There was one other story about the house that I didn't witness, but Josh swore it happened. He was alone in the basement one night, watching a movie, when he heard the upstairs door leading to the basement stairs creak open, slow and deliberate. Then the steps began to creak, one by one, like someone was descending carefully. Thinking it was his dad trying to scare him, something his dad had done before, Josh decided to turn the tables. He crept to the bottom of the stairs, ready to jump out and surprise his dad the moment he reached the last step. But as he waited, he heard the upstairs door slam open again, and his dad's voice called out, startled, from the top of the stairs. They both burst out at the same moment, each thinking the other was trying to prank them. His dad had heard the basement door open and footsteps coming up the stairs, assuming Josh was sneaking around. Neither could explain how they'd heard the same noises, doors opening, footsteps creaking, but in opposite directions, like the sounds were projected to trick them both. It was as if something in the house was mimicking their movements, orchestrating the confusion. That house always felt alive in the worst way, like it had a mind of its own. The voices, the crashes, the footsteps, they weren't just random noises. They had intent, a playful malice that made you question your senses. Looking back, I wonder if it was just the house or something tied to me, because I've had other strange experiences with sound, like a chilling encounter when I was a kid. But that's another story. All I know is that Josh's place was unlike anywhere else I've been, and those nights in that haunted house left a mark I'll never shake. I've always felt my reaction to this situation was foolish, which is why I rarely bring it up. In dangerous moments, I tend to freeze, going quiet and compliant, even as my mind screams to run or fight. That night, I was living with my stepsister in a cramped apartment. We both worked night shifts, but I usually got home a few hours before she did. I just walked through the door, exhausted, when a knock came. Peering through the peephole, I didn't recognize the guy standing there. Assuming he was one of her friends, I opened the door to let him know she was still at work. To my surprise, he said he was there to see me. He introduced himself as a neighbor living a few doors down and mentioned he'd noticed me carrying a guitar case to and from my car. He asked if I played. I nodded, confirming I did. It was clear by now that he was very drunk, his words slurred, his eyes glassy. He asked if I'd play something for him. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but I've never been good at saying no. Hesitantly, I agreed. He stepped inside, and as he did, he locked the door behind him. My stomach dropped, but the situation was already spiraling. I started toward my bedroom to grab my guitar, and he tried to follow. I managed to muster enough courage to stop him, suggesting he sit on the couch in the living room where he'd be more comfortable. He complied, slumping onto the cushions. I retrieved my guitar and played a couple of songs, my fingers shaky on the strings. To my surprise, he started crying, his face crumpling as he mumbled that I had the voice of an angel. Then he asked if he could play a song for me. I didn't want to prolong this, but again, I couldn't refuse. I handed him the guitar. He fumbled with it, his fingers clumsy, unable to produce a single coherent note. He insisted the issue was my guitar, it was acoustic, and he was used to an electric. Then came the wild claim. He said he'd been the lead guitarist for Metallica, back before they got famous. He even claimed most of their songs were his, stolen by the band after he left. I didn't believe a word of it, but I nodded along, feigning sympathy to keep things calm. He grew more insistent, saying he could prove he was a great guitarist if I came to his apartment, where he had an electric guitar. My gut screamed that this was a terrible idea. Letting a drunk stranger into my home was bad enough, but leaving with him was unthinkable. Still, he pressed, his tone growing urgent. I tried to deflect, but he wouldn't let it go. Not knowing how to shut him down, I reluctantly agreed, my mind racing for an excuse to back out as we walked the short distance to his place. His apartment was a wreck, clutter everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, a stale smell hanging in the air. He rummaged around, claiming he'd misplaced his guitar, only to remember he'd sold it years ago. Instead, he offered to put on a Star Wars movie, the second prequel, I think, though the details blur, and suggested we crack open some beers. I nodded, just to keep things from escalating, though I had no intention of drinking. He started the movie and launched into more absurd stories, claiming his family had been involved in filming it, along with other outlandish lies that fell apart under scrutiny. About 20 minutes into the movie, his mood shifted. He turned to me, his voice low and trembling, and said he had something to confess. He claimed a dark force visited him every night. He called it Satan, saying it urged him to kill me. Tears streamed down his face as he insisted he didn't want to hurt me, that I was too kind, maybe even an angel. But then he warned that Satan would soon take over his body, and if I wanted to live, I needed to leave immediately. My heart pounded, but I seized the chance, standing to go. Before I could reach the door, he stopped me, saying he wanted to give me a gift. He pressed an old coin into my hand, claiming it was an ancient family heirloom worth $1 million. As he closed my fingers around it, he muttered strange, unintelligible words through his tears. Then, suddenly, he screamed at me to run. I didn't hesitate, bolting out the door and back to my apartment, locking it behind me. When I finally looked at the coin, it was just an ordinary 1972 silver dollar, nothing special. I still have it tucked away somewhere. I know I should have called the police or done something, but I didn't. Shame and fear kept me silent. I just hope he never hurt anyone and that he got the help he clearly needed. Looking back, I see how my inability to stand up for myself put me in danger, but in that moment, I was just trying to survive. My father was the kind of deadbeat drug addict you'd see in a cautionary tale, hooked on anything he could inject, snort, or smoke. His life was a cycle of highs and violence, and I could fill a book with stories of his chaos. But one memory stands out raw and vivid from when I was a kid, too young to fully grasp the hell we were living in. My mother stayed with him for my sake, clinging to the hope of giving me a stable home with both parents. She wanted me to have the kind of childhood she dreamed of, but it was a fantasy that crumbled under the weight of his addiction. It wasn't until I was older, looking back, that I realized how bad things were. My father prioritized drugs over everything, including feeding me. He dragged me to crack houses and sketchy neighborhoods, leaving me to fend for myself while he disappeared with his buddies or cheated on my mom. Most mornings, I'd wake up to find him passed out, covered in his own piss and vomit. I couldn't understand why my mother was so broken, working grueling 10-hour shifts only to come home to this nightmare. She shielded me from the worst of it, but the cracks were showing. The breaking point came one day when I was home alone, poking at some strange white powder I'd found on my bookshelf. I didn't know what it was, but I was a curious kid playing with it like it was some kind of toy. When my mom found out, it shattered her. That night, we decided to leave. We packed what little we could carry, clothes, a few keepsakes, stuffed it into bags, and piled into the back of her sister's truck. We drove to my aunt's house, hoping for safety. It took my father 2 days to track us down, and when he did, the fallout was worse than we could have imagined. He showed up at my aunt's doorstep, sobbing, begging us to come back. He swore he'd quit drugs, that he'd change for us. I was just a kid, desperate for a real father, and I believed him. My mom, worn down and hopeful, agreed to return. We went back to our apartment, where everything looked the same, except for 2 dining room chairs oddly placed in the middle of the kitchen. As we stepped inside, everything unraveled. I heard a sickening thud, like a bag of meat hitting the floor. My father had slammed my mom's head against the wall. She collapsed, groaning in pain, not unconscious but dazed. I turned, confused, and felt a surge of anger I'd never known before, like fire coursing through me. I ran at him, no plan, just instinct. But he was faster. His fist came out of nowhere, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up tied to one of those chairs in the kitchen. My ears were ringing, my nose clogged with blood, and I couldn't focus. The room spun as I saw my father by the stove, boiling a pot of water. One of my hands was tied outstretched, and the pain was already unbearable from the ropes cutting into my wrists. Then came the worst moment of my life. He poured the boiling water over my hand. The pain was blinding, unlike anything I'd ever felt. I screamed, and for the first time, I saw my mom cry, her face twisted in horror. If the neighbors hadn't called the police, I'm sure we would have died that night. The cops arrived, and I was rushed to the hospital, treated for second-degree burns covering 3/4 of my hand. The blisters were massive, 2 huge ones and a smaller one, and when they finally popped, the skin underneath was strangely smooth. I also had a fractured orbital bone and a broken nose. My mom filed for divorce the next day, and my father was charged with aggravated assault. He was ordered not to contact us until the trial. For a while, I thought we were safe. My mom and I moved to a new apartment, and I spent most of my time holed up in my room, trying to process everything. About a month later, my mom pushed me to get out and ride my bike to feel like a kid again. I was 2 blocks from home when I saw it, an old Ford with a New York Rangers sticker on the bumper. My father was a die-hard Rangers fan. My heart raced as I pedaled full speed into a nearby park, its exits too narrow for a car to follow. I watched from a distance as he circled the park, his car prowling like a predator. I knew if I tried to leave, he'd be waiting. I turned left, doubling back through a path beside the one I'd entered, using the houses around the park as cover. My mind was blank except for one word: run. I didn't scream for help. I just kept moving. But he was faster. He pulled up at the end of the exit, slurring, "I'm your father. I just want you to come home with me." His words were barely coherent, his eyes wild. He got out of the car, hugged me, and I hugged him back, too scared to resist. As I started to pull away, his hand clamped over my mouth, his other arm grabbing my waist. Before I could react, he shoved me into the trunk and slammed it shut. The darkness was suffocating. The only sounds were the faint crackle of a police scanner on the radio and the hum of the car's engine. I'd seen on TV that some cars have a trunk release inside, but I couldn't find one in the pitch black. My hands fumbled over empty bags, papers, and some plastic tubing, nothing I could use to escape or defend myself. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Would he kill me? Was he planning to disappear with me, to start some twisted new life where my mom could never find me? I thought about how she'd blame herself, how this would break her. I lost track of time, though I later learned it was only about 20 minutes. Then a jolt. My father lost control of the car and crashed into oncoming traffic on a busy road. I was thrown around in the trunk, the impact breaking 2 ribs, refracturing my orbital bone and dislocating my shoulder. My father died on impact. The trunk popped open in the crash, and the rush of fresh air mixed with the metallic taste of blood in my mouth is something I'll never forget. The ambulance arrived first. The paramedics were cautious, worried I might be paralyzed from the crash. I was murmuring nonsense, barely conscious, that they pricked my feet with a pen to check for sensation. They loaded me onto a stretcher as police swarmed the scene. At the hospital, my clothes were cut off and replaced with a blanket. They put me in a dark room, the only light coming from a TV playing Dora the Explorer. A nurse explained they need to sedate me so the doctors could treat my injuries. I screamed that I wouldn't sleep, terrified of closing my eyes, but the drugs took over and I drifted off, fighting the restraints until I couldn't anymore. When I woke, I was being wheeled back to my family. I screamed and cried, overwhelmed, but my mom and relatives were there, calming me down. I spent the next week in the hospital, watching every episode of Pokemon I could, trying to escape into something normal. I'm still not fully okay with what happened. For a while, I turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain, but I kicked them because I refused to become like him. I often wonder what life would have been like with a normal father in a normal family. But that's a dream that never existed for me. It was the summer of 2005, and my husband, kids, and I were staying at a resort in Rockingham County in North Virginia, alongside my brother-in-law and his family. I was 28 at the time, and while I don't recall the exact month, the news was dominated by the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, a story that hung heavy in the air. We were staying in a spacious 2-bedroom apartment within a cluster of similar units, surrounded by a large parking lot. The resort was nestled in the mountains, a familiar landscape for me since I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. I woke up early one morning, before the rest of my family stirred, craving some exercise to clear my head. I slipped into my workout clothes and headed out for a walk. The road outside the resort wound upward, a steep incline that promised a good workout. For someone used to mountain terrain, it felt invigorating, though challenging. The air was crisp, and I didn't notice the sound of a car approaching until it was right beside me, startling me. A man white with brown hair, maybe in his 30s, was driving slowly, keeping pace with my steps. He leaned out the window and called, "Hey, you want to ride?" I glanced at him, trying to stay calm. "No, thank you. I'm just taking a walk. Thanks." His offer felt odd, out of place on this quiet country road. I'd never been approached like this before, and it set me on edge. I figured he might think I was stranded or needed help, a misunderstanding I could clear up with a polite refusal. But he didn't drive off. Instead, he kept his car creeping alongside me, matching my pace. "I can give you a ride," he said again, his voice insistent. By now, alarm bells were ringing in my head. I tried to hide my growing unease, keeping my eyes forward, focusing on the road ahead. "No, I'm okay. Thanks," I repeated, my tone firm but not confrontational. His car was an older model, small and dark-colored, maybe dark blue or gray, though I'm no car expert, and the details didn't stick. He didn't let up, continuing to drive beside me, repeating his offer. Each refusal seemed to make him more persistent, and I could feel the tension building. My mind raced, calculating my options. The resort was too far behind me to turn back easily, but up ahead, there was another cluster of apartments like the one we were staying in. They were closer than my own unit, and I decided that if he made a move, I'd sprint toward them. Even if he had a gun, I told myself I'd run for it, weaving through the buildings for cover. The road was narrow, and I hoped the presence of other people nearby would deter him. Just then, another car approached from behind, forcing him to pull forward. I kept walking, my heart pounding, aiming for the apartments. When I glanced up, I saw he'd stopped at the top of the hill, turned his car around, and was now facing me, idling in the middle of the road. It felt like he was waiting, either for me to reach him or to come back down and try again. I second-guessed myself. Maybe I should have turned back when I had the chance. But I was committed now, moving steadily toward the apartments, determined not to show fear. He sat there for a few minutes as I closed the distance, my steps deliberate but quick. Another car came up behind him, forcing him to move again. As he drove past me, heading back down the hill, he leaned out and shouted something, his voice loud and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. The rage in his tone chilled me. He sped off in the direction we'd come from, and just like that, he was gone. I reached the apartments, my pulse still racing, and took a moment to catch my breath. The encounter left me shaken, wondering what his intentions had been. Was he just a creep, or was there something darker at play? The way he lingered, refusing to take no for an answer, felt predatory, like a moment ripped from a true crime story. I've always been curious about what might have happened if I'd made a different choice, but I'm grateful I walked away unharmed. It's a memory that still haunts me, a reminder of how quickly a normal morning can turn into something unsettling. Yesterday, I moved into a new place, an ancient mansion in a small New England town, built in 1848 according to online records. It's massive, 6,000 square feet sprawled across 3 floors, with a creepy, dungeon-like basement. Originally a single-family home, it was converted into multiple units at some point before being restored to a single residence. The place is a maze of odd construction, walled-off doorways, unexplained spaces between walls, 2 staircases leading to different parts of the basement, and 3 others climbing to the second floor. There's even a peculiar staircase that ends at a single, isolated room tucked between the first and second floors, right in the heart of the house. I'm staying here alone for a while as a favor to a friend who owns it. The mansion had been empty for some time, and my friend underestimated the renovation costs, so I'm keeping an eye on the place. Last night, my first night alone in this labyrinth of doors and stairways, I had my first ever paranormal experience. I've always been open to the idea of the supernatural, though I'd never encountered anything beyond sleep paralysis. Around midnight, I was out on the back porch, smoking my last cigarette of the night, the cool air sharp against my skin. I came back inside through the kitchen, everything neat and tidy, and headed to the bathroom connected to it. After that, I settled into my bedroom, more like a grand dining room with a small entryway and a fireplace. I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I was binging Game of Thrones, losing myself in the show. At 2:30 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom again. I walked down the long hallway, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Just before making the sharp left turn into the kitchen, I flipped the light switch. My sauce stopped me cold, a wave of chills washing over me, my heart rate spiking to 150. Every single cabinet and drawer in the kitchen was wide open, as if someone had methodically pulled them out. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to steady myself, my mind racing for a rational explanation. Gathering what little courage I had, I made a shaky dash across the kitchen to the bathroom. Just before entering, I hit the light switch, and my heart rate must have hit 200. The bathroom was the same. Every drawer, cabinet door, and even the vanity mirrors were flung open. Then I noticed the shower curtain drawn shut, concealing the tub. I distinctly remembered leaving it open earlier, an old habit because closed curtains always creep me out. I didn't touch anything. I left it all as it was and hurried back to my room, my pulse pounding in my ears. I sat upright in bed all night, staring at the doorway, waiting for the sun to rise. As I sat there, I heard a ceramic mug fall into the kitchen sink, clattering and bouncing around before going silent. No other sounds came from the kitchen, but the basement directly beneath me was alive with noises, something like a metal yard rake scraping across the stone floor, followed by the sound of objects being shifted or dragged. I didn't dare investigate. In the morning, I asked my friend about the house's history, keeping my experience to myself. He mentioned it had been a poorly run sober house for years, shut down earlier that year. He also said there had been several overdose deaths on the property over time. Given the house's age, nearly 2 centuries old, who knows what else has happened here? I'm about to face my second night alone in this place. I've shared this story with others before, and some have dismissed it as carbon monoxide poisoning or undiagnosed schizophrenia. But I know what I saw and heard. The house feels alive in a way that's hard to explain, and I'm torn between staying to see if it's just a restless spirit being playful or getting out before something worse happens. I was working the overnight shift at a small 24-bed psychiatric ward in a medium-sized hospital built in the 1950s. The staff always whispered about the place being haunted. Stories of strange sightings and eerie feelings were common. I'd been there for about 10 years, though, and never experienced anything paranormal myself. I was starting to think it was all just hospital lore, the kind of tales people tell to spook new hires. But that changed one night around 1 a.m. A tech stationed outside a sleeping patient's room, doing direct line-of-sight observation, came rushing to the nurse's station with another tech in tow. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with urgency. They said they'd just seen a shadow person, a dark human-like figure with no clear features, walk out of room 610, glide down the hall, and slip into the assistant director's office. The monitor tech, whose job was to watch the unit's camera feeds, chimed in, confirming she'd seen it too on the screen. I felt a pang of jealousy. Everyone seemed to have a ghost story except me, and I was determined to see something for myself. I decided to walk down the hall and check it out, peering through the windows of the assistant director's office door. I'd been down that hallway countless times, probably 10,000 or more over the years, but this time felt different. The air grew colder with every step, far colder than even the chilliest winter nights in the hospital. It wasn't just the temperature, though. There was a heaviness, an oppressive weight that made each step harder than the last. My chest tightened, and I felt something unsettling, an overwhelming sense of hatred, pure and raw. Like whatever was there wanted me to know it despised me. It didn't feel human, like it had never been human, and loathed all of us who were. I glanced back and saw the entire crew at the nurse's station, their heads peeking around the door, watching me. No way was I going to chicken out in front of them. I forced myself to keep going, but the closer I got to the office, the worse it felt. About 5 feet from the door, a crushing sense of impending doom hit me, like I was certain I'd die if I took another step. My body refused to move closer, as if an invisible wall held me back. Then the blinds in the office door's window swung open on their own. I saw it, a shadowy outline with a cone-shaped head, like someone in a hooded robe, its mouth frozen in a silent, eternal scream, with gaping holes where eyes should have been. Panic took over. I turned and ran back toward the nurse's station, toward the safety of other people, not daring to look back. When I reached the station, my coworker said I was white as a sheet, trembling, mumbling incoherently, and drenched in cold sweat. The monitor tech pulled up the camera footage and showed me what they'd seen. A misty black fog had chased me about 150 feet down the hall before dissipating near room 610. Everyone at the station had witnessed it, both in person and on the feed. I wanted to keep a record of it, but the hospital administration shut that down fast. They said releasing the footage could damage the hospital's reputation, especially for the psych ward. I tried to record on my phone the next shift, but they forced me to delete that too. Still, I had 7 solid witnesses who saw the whole thing. Coworkers who'd been there, who felt the same eerie chill and saw that unnatural shadow. That night changed me. I'd always been skeptical, but standing in that hallway, feeling that hatred and seeing that figure, I knew something otherworldly was real, and it wanted nothing to do with us. This is both my own story and one shared with my uncle, aunt, cousins, and mom, centered around a house in Indiana we call the Red House. It was my first brush with the paranormal, but far from my last. My uncle, aunt, and their 3 kids, CJ, Nicole, and Joe, moved into the house in the early 1990s. It was a large 2-story shingle-style home on a corner lot, painted a striking red. The basement was unsettling, mostly unfinished with dirt floors and rough stone walls, and it had a detached garage. There was also a secret room, which I'll get to later. My first visit was for Christmas 1991. We drove up from Florida to spend a week with my uncle's family. Before the trip, I talked to my cousin CJ, the middle child, sandwiched between his older sister, Nicole, and younger brother, Joe. He told me over the phone that I'd see ghosts when I visited. I laughed it off, calling him crazy. At the time, I was sure ghosts weren't real. But CJ was insistent, saying he saw them often, especially upstairs where his bedroom was. He mentioned one ghost that entered his room, while others lingered in the hallway or other parts of the house. I told him I'd believe it only if I saw it myself. When we arrived, I was struck by the house's size. It was the largest I'd ever stayed in, and I immediately imagined playing hide-and-seek or manhunt with my cousins. I was sharing CJ's room, which had bunk beds. My parents stayed downstairs in a spare bedroom. As I climbed the stairs to CJ's room, I noticed the upstairs hallway was unusually long but had only 3 doors, a bathroom on the left, Nicole's room on the right, and CJ's room at the far end. His room was massive, like a small ballroom. Straight ahead was the bunk bed with a large window behind it. To the right, he had a TV and video game system, and to the left, toys and Hot Wheels racetracks were scattered. There was also a small crawl space door on the left wall, barely noticeable. That first night, CJ shared more stories about the ghosts he'd seen in his room and around the house. His tales spooked me, but I remained skeptical. I couldn't help noticing the dark circles under his eyes, though. He said he barely slept, often staying up most nights, too uneasy to rest. We went to bed, and nothing strange happened. But the next day, things changed. On the second day, after playing outside, CJ and I went to his room to watch a movie and mess around with toys. We set up his Hulk Hogan wrestling tent in the middle of the room, pretending it was a stadium for our action figures. To keep Nicole from barging in and messing with our setup, we placed a Spytek motion sensor toy by the door. It would beep if anyone entered. As we played inside the tent, it started to shake lightly. I barely noticed at first, thinking it was just us moving around. But within a minute, the shaking grew violent, the fabric flapping wildly. I assumed Nicole was pranking us and peeked out, but the doorway was empty. By the time I ducked back inside, the shaking stopped. CJ was frozen, staring at the tent's unzipped window, his eyes fixed on nothing. Seconds later, the tent shook again. I leapt out and saw it tremble for a moment before going still. I accused CJ of trying to scare me, but his pale face told me he was just as shaken. I considered Nicole, but the motion sensor's beep when I opened the door proved no one else had entered. I checked, and Nicole was in her room, lying on her bed, watching TV. Though rattled, I still wasn't convinced a ghost was responsible. At dinner, I told my parents, who chuckled, dismissing it as imagination. My uncle added, "Did CJ's stories get to you too?" Apparently, CJ had told his parents about his experiences, but they brushed them off as a kid's overactive mind, refusing to entertain the idea of ghosts. That night, I slept on the bottom bunk, CJ on the top. What happened next is seared into my memory. As I was dozing off, CJ reached down from the top bunk and whispered for me to look down the hall. The bunk bed was positioned so that, depending on which side you lay on, You could see straight down the long upstairs hallway. I turned my head and saw a tall, slender man walking slowly toward our room. He wore a toboggan hat and a long coat, his face covered in what looked like soot or dusty powder. Below his knees, there were no legs, just empty space as if he floated. My heart pounded. He vanished before reaching the room, dissolving into the air in seconds. I was paralyzed with fear, turning my face into my pillow, trembling. A few minutes later, an icy chill crept over the side of my body facing the door. I slowly turned and saw a woman, clear as day, standing inches from me. Her clothes were tattered, and she held a cat. She had a musky smell, like stale perfume, faint but distinct. Her body reminded me of the Fratelli mom from the Goonies, gaunt and eerie, but I couldn't make out her face. I couldn't scream or call for my parents. I buried myself under the sheets, pillow over my head, and stayed that way most of the night, too terrified to move. The next morning, I ran downstairs and told my mom. Unlike the day before, she didn't laugh it off. She hugged me, saying everything would be okay, and that some things couldn't be explained. A few days later on Christmas, we opened presents and went outside to ride bikes and rollerblade. While we were out, my mom went upstairs to shower, alone in the house. She heard the bathroom door open and footsteps approaching the shower. Thinking it was my stepdad, she called out but got no response. When she pulled back the shower curtain, the door was open, and a cold burst of air hit her face, strong enough to push her back a few steps. A towel on the countertop fell to the floor. After her shower, she asked my stepdad if he'd been in the bathroom, but he'd been outside with us the whole time. Years later, when I was a teenager, she admitted the house had creeped her out from our first night there. She felt watched and sensed a breath on her neck while walking the hallway alone. We left a few days after Christmas. I felt awful for CJ, who had to keep living in that house, tormented by whatever was there. Not long after, the activity escalated, and my uncle and aunt started having their own experiences, which finally pushed them to sell the house and move a few blocks away. Here are some of the incidents they shared with me, in no particular order, just as I remember them telling me. Their old German Shepherd, Yankee, had bad hips and split his time between the house and the detached garage, where he liked to hide during storms. One night, something spooked him so badly that he leapt through a small garage window, nearly 6 feet off the ground, and was found pawing frantically at the back door. Another time, after returning from a vacation, they found their 500-gallon fish tank shattered, all the fish dead. The tank's glass was thick, and there was no sign of anything heavy falling to break it. Once, my youngest cousin Joe was at the top of the stairs, playing with a slinky while Nicole watched from below. Suddenly, Nicole said it looked like Joe was pushed from behind. His body lurched forward, and he tumbled down the stairs, breaking his clavicle. She didn't see anyone behind him, just described the motion like an invisible force had shoved him. Before moving out, they explored the crawl space in CJ's room, which they thought led nowhere. After clearing out bags of old rat poison, they realized it was a passageway. Crawling through the tight space for about 8 feet, they found a hidden room, like a time capsule. It was thick with dust and cobwebs, the air stale. An old desk, boxes of worn shoes, and newspapers from the 1930s and 1940s were scattered around. My uncle was stunned they'd lived there for years without knowing the room existed. Even the landlord was surprised when they told him, claiming he had no knowledge of it. The house earned its nickname, the Red House, because of its exterior. The first year my family lived there, the landlord hired painters to cover the red with yellow. Within months, the red bled through, pale but unmistakable. Neighbors said it wasn't the first time. Every attempt to paint the house another color failed, with the red always returning. The final straw came on the night of CJ's first Little League baseball game of the season. CJ and my uncle were already at the ball fields. My aunt got Nicole and Joe into the car, parked in the detached garage behind the house, its driveway facing a side street. Before leaving, she went through the house, turning off all the lights except the living room lamp, the kitchen light, and the exterior ones. It was dusk as they pulled out and drove around to the front of the house. My aunt glanced up and froze. Every single light in the house was on, glowing brightly. As she stared, she saw the curtains in CJ's room part, revealing a dark, shadowy silhouette in the window. She drove straight to the ball fields, told my uncle, and insisted it was time to leave. Soon after, they broke their lease and moved. Neighbors often told my uncle and aunt the house was haunted, and my cousins heard similar stories at school from local kids who knew its reputation. One neighbor claimed people had died there, murders, suicides, and that shady, malevolent types had lived in the house over its long history. My family never verified these stories. Once they left, they wanted nothing more to do with the Red House. For Americans unfamiliar with shingle-style homes, they're a classic New England architectural style, with wooden shingle exteriors, often seen in older, grand houses like this one, which added to its eerie, historic feel.